Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. I hope you enjoyed your Earth Day celebrations yesterday. Rosie, what Earth Day celebrations? Like, who gives a flying? I know. It's a sign of the times there. Anyway, it is the 23rd of April, 2020. At least we got spring in the air here at 80 degrees today, and I am loving it. Let's have a little departure today. You know, one of the things that I really have a passion for is history, particularly history that people kind of know, but they really don't know. You know, maybe it's obscure, maybe it's something where the facts get twisted over time, and therefore it's just because something that you pass off. Yeah, we all know about that, but do you really know about it? In this time of pandemic, it's interesting to look back at somebody that was asymptomatic with a disease. And asymptomatic means you really don't show any signs of the illness that can infect and kill other people. Such was the case of the very famous Mary Mallon, a name that you probably know better, a person that you probably know better as Typhoid Mary. Yes, she was a real person, and her struggles and her life was unbelievable. Of course, she was quite the participant and quite the architect of a lot of her own misery in the early 1900s. Let's dig into her case a little bit and see how things were handled at that time, when somebody really kind of refused to toe the line in terms of self-quarantine and not getting into a profession or leaving a profession that may end up killing people. She was born in Mary Mallon was born in Ireland in the late 1800s, 1880s maybe, and she immigrated to New York, as many others did, with the wave of Irish immigrants seeking a better life, and most of them, of course, ended up in New York. And she was quite skilled when she came over. She was a handsome, robust woman, and she was a good cook. She had been well trained in the culinary arts. Unfortunately, she had also picked up typhoid disease, which could be fatal in about 10% of the cases. They were just getting a handle on bacteriology and studying diseases back then, and they knew about bacteria. And they had certain procedures that they wanted to follow and could isolate and check it, but there was no real vaccine for typhoid until 1911. And of course, it wasn't until decades later, when antibiotics were introduced, that could treat typhoid rather easily. Although today we have some resistance among the overuse of antibiotics has created more resistant type of varieties. But let's get back to our story. It's an interesting one. She lands in New York and she starts to seek employment, and she has one signature dish that she's famous for, and that's her peach ice cream, her homemade peach ice cream. Very skilled. That's great. Love it. Well, one day she found employment with this family called the Warren family, and the family was very wealthy. I believe the year was around 1907, and it was quite a well-to-do family. I think it was 11 people in the family. Well, she was hired to be their cook, and in short order, 7 or 8 out of the people of the family got ill, and 2 of them died. Well, this was a tragedy. Now remember, the Warren family was wealthy. So the father, the head of the family, decided to hire a sanitary engineer, by the name of Sobel. Okay, his name was Sober, Sober. What a name, huh? And he was also an investigator, and he was very dogged and very methodical in the work he did. He was called in to examine the situation, and he initially thought that the family was laid ill by some soft clams that were bad. Hey, it happens sometimes, right? Some seafood, hepatitis A or whatever, you eat it, you get ill. So he initially thought that might have been the cause. But when he started to do a little digging around and looking into the kitchen and looking at the cook, he thought to himself, I wonder if she might have misprepared a dish. He started to go back and check her background, and found out that in short order, since she'd been a cook for quite a few families. And in digging back more, some of the people in those families that she had cooked for, a great number of them had gotten sick and died. Well, he was putting two to two together. He said, you know what I need to do? I need to have a stool sample from her, or a blood sample, or urine sample, something to check her. Well, he said, you know, she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't provide it. Sometimes she even came at him with a kitchen meat fork and probably a couple knives too. Well, he turned to the health commissioner of New York City, and they eventually demanded, they showed up at where she was cooking, and the police came too, and to demand to her that she provide a stool sample. Well, she went crazy, and just took them 5 hours to finally track her down. She fled. No way that she was going to do that. Finally, she rendered her sample, and they found out that she was, diseased. Although she was asymptomatic and not showing traces of, the obvious manifestations of the disease, she was a carrier. They ended up petitioning to have her put on an island called Bird Island off of the coast of New York, of Manhattan. Well, she lived there for a couple years, and then sympathies, people started to read of a story or the feels. People thought this might not be a good thing. The new health commissioner of New York came in, and maybe this isn't the right thing we do to stick this person away. And concurrent with that, the great William Randolph Hearst, yellow journalism himself, let no story be unjuicy at the end. Decided to feature the story of Mary Mallon, and that's where the name Typhoid Mary came from. One of the reporters thought that would evoke some sympathy. Actually, it ended up being the worst thing that ever happened to her. They started putting the story together of how terrible it was, and she eventually sued to get free of her confinement. No doubt William Randolph Hearst provided some of the money for her to do so that she would share her story. Hearst was all about make it juicy, man, make it big so that you could sell newspapers. Okay. Well, she won. She got her freedom. And the health commissioner had one requirement. Please get yourself a different line of work. Don't become a cook. Well, guess what she does? She becomes a cook, changes her higher name to Mary Brown, and guess what happens? Yep, you guessed it. The family start falling like dominoes again. She's serving out that peach ice cream, and they're dropping like flies out there. And some of them are dying. Over the course of her early shedding of the disease, it was figured that 3,000 people were infected in New York City, and most probably came from her asymptomatic shedding of the bacteria. Okay. Well, they finally tracked her down, and yeah, that's her. That's Typhoid Mary. Yeah. She's still cooking. They sent her off to seclusion again, where she lived for, I believe, 28 years in seclusion, never to see freedom again. Of course, she had the strength of her religion. But, what a miserable life for somebody to live. And it shows some of the tragedy of being an asymptomatic carrier of a disease. So she was buried in Riverside Cemetery in New York in 1938. Interestingly, if you look at the thumbnail, and I don't know how clear it is, but you'll see the cartoon drawing of her standing over a frying pan in the kitchen, breaking what appears to be eggs into the frying pan. Well, if you take a closer look, they ain't eggs. They're human skulls. So, they sure knew how to puff up a story back in the early 1900s. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this little sojourn into history. And one of the most famous and notorious spreaders of disease, asymptomatic carriers in history, Mary Mallon, a.k.a. Typhoid Mary. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Your thumbs up are appreciated. And let me know if you enjoy these little forays into history. I sure do, and they certainly bring our current times into more focus here as we fight this COVID-19 pandemic. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.